Okay, you're in.
Yeah. Okay, can you just stay in? Because if that one works, then I don't know where the others came from, but that one will be fine. You can switch on record, can't you? Yeah.
Which contains our notes going back several calls. That's in the calendar item. I will paste it in here as well. I have an initial agenda sketched out in the notes. And if you can add yourself to the attendees section. And we also have an ERD that Rob just proposed to us. Hooray. Wait, where did I put it? Let's see. You'll be able to take a look at the 2.0 diagram.
Yeah, you'll definitely have to open the image in another tab or something. I literally got the code working to embed it 10 minutes ago.
All right. Let's see. I think we have, oh, okay. Devin, welcome. Kate, welcome. I'm going to give it one more minute, but I think we have enough to get started. Let's actually go ahead. It's a relatively small crew, so we can have introductions. I think most of y'all know each other, but there's a couple new faces here.
Shall we start recording, Greg?
Yeah, go ahead. Dinesh, go ahead and start recording for us. Thank you. All right. Welcome. We are starting the community call to hopefully cap off the process of upgrading the human service data specification to 2.0. My name is Greg Bloom. I know most of you folks. I'm going to have people go around, tell us your name, your organization, and just like one word about how you're feeling today. Really, we'll just keep it really mercifully brief. Mike, go ahead.
Mike, Tourism Limited, London, looking forward to a vaccine.
Indeed. Rob.
Sure, so I'm Rob Redpath. I work for Open Data Services Co-op. We've been doing the tech work on this upgrade cycle. Mike used more than one word, I will too. Not looking forward to the local lockdown that's about to come into force in my city, and resisting the temptation to, as we've been told, now we've been told not to spend one last weekend partying. I wasn't planning to, but I kind of want to now.
Ben, welcome. Ben's muted. It's all right.
There you go. That's the button. Yeah, I'm Ben Webb. I also work for Data Services Co-op, and I'm just realising I've not checked the list that's come out today properly yet, so I don't know if I'm expecting a local lockdown or not.
Right on. Dinesh, there's someone who's trying to join the call, but she's blocked. Can you coordinate with Catherine Ma?
Yeah, I've been able to let other people in, and now I'm co-host, so I'm a bit stuck with why Catherine can't.
I might have given her an old one, so I just re-forwarded the invite. We'll see if that helps.
Right, okay.
Catherine, go ahead and introduce yourself while we have you.
Sure. I'm Catherine Ma. I'm the Director of Community Resources at NowPow, and being able to share information in an easily shareable format has come up in many, many conversations, and so I'm really excited to be joining these conversations. I also am definitely not the tech person of my group, and so I was trying to bring in either Luke or Agnes, who works in our analytics department. So I think Agnes will join us shortly. Okay. Nice to meet everyone.
Hello. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
We can hear you.
Devin can't seem to hear me.
I can hear you.
Agnes, welcome.
Good morning.
Agnes, you were able to join us.
Yeah, sorry. I was on a Google, some sort of like Google Meet, and then Catherine was like, I think we're in a different place right now.
Okay, Agnes, it's nice to meet you. I don't think we've connected before. Thanks for joining us. You're coming in at the tail end of this process. If you do have any specific questions or suggestions, please let me know in the chat. And also please check the documents, the Google Doc, which is available in the it's available in the calendar item, and I'm also pasting it in here. And Atticus, welcome.
Hi, Atticus Rains, Hunger Free America. Narrowly dodging the local lockdowns in my area by being in the Bronx instead of Brooklyn, so that's great. Yeah, happy to be here.
Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Lambacker, and I am here pretty much representing the OpenSeoc project, super old, but still trucking along community information referral software. I always feel like the old lady of these calls because I've been doing this for 20-something years now, which kind of horrifies me. Yeah, as in terms of how I'm doing, I'm not in a hotspot, and it's Thanksgiving long weekend here in Canada, so I'm doing okay. I want it to be the weekend already.
Right on. Kate, you're always a very welcome presence on these calls. I would not call you the old lady. You are the wise. You are the sage. You are the elder stateswoman. Thank you for joining us. I think that's everybody. Maybe Devin. Devin, you want to just give us a quick hello?
Hi, Devin with Serapis. We've built some open referral HSDS tools, including OR services, which exists on GitHub as a kind of simple directory that follows the HSDS standard. I'm in New York. I'm hungry.
Right on. Okay. Thank you all for bearing with us as we walk through that. I'm going to give just a quick overview of the process to date. First, I also want to thank Mike Thacker and his colleagues at Pourism and the LGA. Is sort of their hustle over in the UK, where there's been a burst of activity in and around the government and nonprofit sector, aligning around these common protocols. And it was definitely the hustle that you all brought together and the leadership that you showed that brought us the resources that we needed to go through this quick cycle. And also some of your feedback was really instrumental along the way. So thank you, first of all, to Mike Thacker and Pourism and all those folks in the UK. We're excited to see the work that you all are doing. So we've been working on this. This was initially going to be a 3-month cycle, and normally I should know better and to end up tripling the estimates of these times. But the fact that it's only been a 9-month cycle in the midst of the pandemic, I think we should be kind of proud of. This was not we're going from HSDS 1.1 to 2.0, but there's actually really only a small number of important changes here, but they are changes that we've heard asked for over and over again over the last 4 years since we went from HSDS 1.0 to 1.1. These are the most common bits of feedback. So we didn't address everything that showed up in the GitHub queue. We wanted to prioritize and I'm going to carve out some space for at least one issue that we know we want to get to in a future development cycle. And if there's any other issues that are important for you all, if we get through the summary and sort of the question period and we have some more time at the end of this call, I'm eager to hear anything else that you all are working on that hasn't yet been addressed that you think we should talk about in the future. But in the meantime, this is officially, assuming we reach some sort of rough consensus, which means that maybe not everybody agrees with everything, but everybody can live with everything that's been proposed. If we reach some sort of rough consensus, this call will essentially be the decision point for the Open Referral Initiative on the proposal that Open Data Services Co-op has put forth after several rounds of feedback and deliberation and proposals to date. So thank you for joining us here. I haven't heard from anyone that there's any like outstanding questions or issues that they want to make sure get addressed in this, or concerns. So right now, I'm assuming we're just going to walk through, hear things out, ask any final questions, and move forward. If there's any issue that you think remains unresolved that needs to be resolved, if I haven't heard from you yet, so I'll be a little miffed, but I do welcome any last minute questions. Just please let me know in the chat so we can try to carve out the right amount of time to address it. But if you'll take a look at the doc, we have the agenda laid out. We'll be kicking this over to Rob to summarize the process and the proposed changes. He already has a Google Doc that is linked up at the top of the notes that provides the sort of like high-level headlines and then summaries of each of the proposed changes. So please, if you are having trouble locating anything that we're referring to, please let me know. We'll walk through the set of big top-level items. We'll talk about what comes next in the transition phase from 1.1 to 2.0. And there's at least one or two other items of business that if we have time at the end of the hour, I'm eager to discuss with you all. So any questions before we jump in? Great, okay, cool, awesome. Rob, take it away. Give us what you got.
Cool. So yeah, we've gone through this process that started off right at the start of the year. We've had a few calls like this. We've gone through the various GitHub issues queue. We've looked at a lot of the ideas that people have put forward. We've taken a lot of inspiration from the work that Mike's team have done and the other stuff that's going on elsewhere in the UK. And it's brought to the fore that there's a few issues with the existing standard and a few ways in which the standard is now being used that the existing schema just doesn't really support very well. So while this is a major version update, it's a 2.0. It's not a very significant one. To a certain extent, it's frustrating that we have to call it a 2.0 and that's a term that's gained so much extra sort of meaning that it kind of shouldn't have. It's a bigger number because it breaks some stuff, but it's not a bigger number because it fixes everything. It's not a big step change. It's just a step forward. And yeah, I've tried to downplay it as much as I can. At the same time, I'm quite excited about some of the stuff that we're able to change here because it does introduce a lot of flexibility and introduces a lot of hopefully solutions to problems that people are having now that HSDS has been around for a few years and people are using it in new ways. Do you want me to crack on with the overview of what we're changing, Greg? Cool. So yeah, 4 main changes, and I'll do them in the order that are in my doc. Sorry, because that means I can just work through my notes. Scheduling, first of all. The scheduling system in 1.1 works fairly well, but definitely doesn't work too well if you're trying to convert data into it. And there's a few little things that people found that that you can't support. If something opens and closes multiple times a day, or if something has what is to a human a fairly intuitive or easy to express things like first Monday of the month or something like that, it's actually quite hard to express that in the existing HSDS. So, and also people have over time just become more and more familiar. A lot of people don't know what it's called, and why should they? But iCal R rules underlie the repeating data interface in Google Calendar and every piece of calendaring software you've ever used. So people are quite familiar with this idea of here's an event, it recurs, and here are the drop downs I expect. That's powered by R rules. R rules themselves are actually quite hard to read and to parse. Even if in a database you can't do maths on them, it's non-trivial to say this is before that. which you might argue is a flaw with our rule, but I'm going to leave the ICAL team to it because they've done a generally wonderful job. What we've done is we've pulled out the variables from our rule and put them into a table. And so now pretty much anything that you want to, any degree of recurrence that you want to express, you can do with our rules. And if you want to now say something is on the first Friday of the month, or it's between 9 and 12 and 1 and 5 on the days that it happens, you can do that. And that restructuring also makes it a little bit more straightforward and a little bit more obvious that you can just have lots of entries. If your schedule is quite complicated, you can represent that. Cool. I will probably pause there for a second to let anyone else, if anyone has any questions on that or concerns about that aspect of what equations change.
Can I just add, in case people haven't picked it up, that means we've got one schedule and our rule can deal with all the exceptions. So we've got rid of the concept of regular schedule and holiday schedule. So Devin, you ought to be pleased we got rid of a table.
Yes, thank you. I hated that table.
Hooray. Any questions about the major change to the scheduling feature? Right on. Doing well. One down.
Cracking. So, classification, taxonomies.
This is a big one.
This is, yeah, by far the largest change, and to the point that it even has its own document to describe it. First thing we're introducing is consistent vocabulary to talk about consistent terminology to talk about classifications. I think this has actually been the most controversial thing because there's a ton of nuance, and I know at least one librarian who I upset by not using the terms in the way that are defined in their profession. Unfortunately, I think I just had to pick some meanings if we're going to be able to have a sensible conversation about it. So we defined some terms, and if you're okay with it, one of the things I'll do before we merge this is make sure that we use that terminology completely consistently across the documentation. I think we do. I haven't 100% checked. So we introduce specific meanings for the word vocabulary, the set of words in a language, the taxonomy as the structure of terms drawn from that vocabulary, a taxonomy term being a particular instance of a term from a vocabulary given meaning. I can see at least one person in this document that might be able to keep up with this. And an attribute being this concept that if you assert that something is true about something else, that's an attribute. Sometimes it's a little bit of a stretch of that. So a license plate on a car is an attribute of the car. I could argue with myself about why that's not a good way of modeling things, but for what we're trying to do here, for the way that you're trying to use this data, it makes sense. Something that's true about something else. And we're trying to take account of a very wide range of uses. We're trying to accommodate people who want to ship almost a folk taxonomy for something, or their own custom taxonomy for their application, through to in the UK, Mike's work wants to use queries and fully resolvable URIs to hook into this term comes from this taxonomy, stick the two together, and you can resolve that to actually find out what the term means, very much down the semantic web route. And we want to support classical taxonomies, I'll call them, that might, things like AIRS, where you have a term and that has a meaning. Even then, AIRS has some complexity around language, that there's AIRS in Canadian French and there's AIRS in US English, and the terms sometimes map, but sometimes they don't. And yeah, there's a ton of complexity there that we need to be able to represent, but, and I'll come on to this a bit more later, what we're not trying to do is overload the standard with too much description, too much meaning. To a certain extent, what we're trying to do with HSDS 2.0 is make a very flexible container so that organizations who need to interoperate locally can use that container and make minimal changes or agree on how they're going to interpret it or use it. So in the UK, we're seeing Mike has an amazing demonstrator of, on the left-hand side, you have a drop-down for your data source, and on the right-hand side, you have a drop-down for your visualization tool, and you click go, and you get your data visualized with that tool. That's a great example of how standards can help, but what's happening there is that all of that's happened in the UK context, and there's the interpretation, the use of the container that the UK's got enables that. I don't think we're at a point where we can take that right-hand side, the visualization tools from Mike's tool, and connect it to something from the other side of the world, because there were just so many interpretations, so much interpretation involved in that. Just the taxonomies. The UK has a fantastically well-supported set of taxonomies to describe services that mean absolutely nothing if you're not in the UK. And so we're trying to get alignment. We're trying to build up this community. It's the great value of this. But ultimately, we're trying to get people to talk rather than throw code at each other. And hopefully, we'll get us there. And yeah, so we have a taxonomy terms table. With the existing taxonomy table goes, we get a taxonomy terms table, which contains everything you need to either ship an entire taxonomy, if that's what you need in your use case. You can say, here's your taxonomy, now you know what I'm talking about, or just the parts that you need to give your data meaning and to be able to go off, make other systems be able to look up where to get that. It's been very interesting. You can't ship all of AIRS for licensing reasons, as far as I know. And you, at the same time, you want to be able to ship all of the taxonomy for your system if you've made your own because you need to do that. And supporting that has been interesting. We heard really strongly that people wanted service, because service is the top level object. We're here to describe services. People want to keep the connection between taxonomy terms and services separate. So we've renamed service taxonomy to service attributes, and that's a link table. It literally just has fields for the attribute, the thing you're trying to link to, and the thing that gives it meaning, and that's it. So it pulls together. You can use the taxonomy terms that you've already defined to define services you've already defined. So that's a really thin link. And we took the idea of a link taxonomy table from the Open Referral UK work, and we've renamed it to other attributes, which lets you then pretty much use a taxonomy term to describe anything else that exists in the schema. For now, the enum in there contains all the things that I think you can usefully describe, but also it'll be a minor release and a very simple process to add anything if someone does want to categorize one of the things that I haven't included. I think that's about it. I guess this does also touch on the last thing of how data can be structured, which I've pulled out for the overview. Because we're not aiming for that global interoperability, the Devin approach of making things into wide tables rather than lots of interlinked tables, and the relational database driven approach of lots of tables are both within the broad umbrella of what we're trying to do with HSDS, even though they're not technically interoperable. I think that having the data maintain a broadly aligned structure and broadly aligned assumptions is probably more important than forcing people to use exactly our structure, because we know people don't do that, because Devin's Airtable stuff is fantastic and is really useful in a particular context, but isn't technically HSDS, and that's absolutely fine. Like, it shouldn't, there's no reason that shouldn't be. It does mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the Atlassian's trade-offs play. It's literally just the classic slider exercise of, do you want to put the X, do you want to do X or Y, and where are you between those two? If we think of standards as removing a load of effort from data users and putting that data effort on, say, publishers. Generally, you want to do that work once. You want the publisher and the standard to do that work once so that users don't do it many times. We're just moving that slide a little bit towards people using the data, that if you're not using the standard verbatim, then you've got a little bit of work to do to perhaps convert it, but that conversion should be really easy, because to convert from a very small table with an ID field and a couple of other fields, you just query it out of the big table. It should be pretty straightforward. Does that all broadly make sense? Are people broadly happy with what we don't do? Are people worried about it? This is by far the biggest change.
Rob, it's Andrew. Thank you for the explanation, and sorry to the group for being late. Yeah, love the classification change, but some clarification on, I haven't seen an updated ERD. It might be out there, but is what we're describing here then essentially a bridge table between service and taxonomy? Is that kind of what the standard is going to look like?
Between service and taxonomy term. So you're doing the linking at a term level. So we're very much saying that if something, you'd have a taxonomy term of red and a service of lorry. Sorry, I'm using mixed examples here, but you would then have an entry in service attributes that makes the lorry red.
And that would be in a separate service taxonomy table?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. I thought that's what you were describing. That's great.
So oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike. I'll speak when you're done.
And just to clarify, it's not necessarily only service. It could be organization or location as well.
Absolutely. So there's two tables. One, there's a service link, the service taxonomy table that links services to taxonomy terms. And we heard from the community that people wanted to keep that separate because it helps to promote service as the top level thing. It's why we're all here. And there's also an other attributes table which lets you link a taxonomy term to pretty much any other object in the schema.
So I'm going to throw a wrench in here. This is Kate. Just around the errors taxonomy stuff, because this doesn't seem to accommodate the fact that systems like errors combine taxonomy terms within the link. So there's actually a double link. So in our system, we've got the service is linked to a taxonomy link table, and the taxonomy link table is linked to individual taxonomy terms that are attached to that, and then the individual taxonomy terms are linked to the table listing all the taxonomy terms. So there's actually 4 tables in that model, because there is a concept of combining multiple terms to create compound terms that is extensively used. So if you're looking here to support errors, and a driver of this is to support systems like errors, this doesn't do it.
So with compound terms, you've got 2 options with this. One is multiple links. If something is both red and yellow, then you put a link in for red and a link in for yellow. Or creating individual entries for those compound terms.
Yeah, so the red and yellow thing won't work, just to explain, because what happens is conceptually, when those 2 things are combined, they become a new concept. So it'd be more like there wasn't a table entry for orange, so you had to make red yellow, which was the concept of orange. But adding red and yellow separately would mean that you support red and yellow, not that you support orange. And the only way to express orange is to make red yellow. So conceptually, it's quite different, and it's insufficient to individually add the terms.
So adding a compound term to the taxonomy term table would then be the solution to that. If something is both, if we're introducing a new concept, if we're saying that this thing is both of these things together but not individually, then conceptually under the scheme, that's a new entry in that table.
So, but then there are multiple codes involved, or multiple IDs. So it starts to become complex to follow that along. Like you won't be able to, I mean, maybe this is the choice you're making. I just want to be clear that it doesn't structurally support the model that a system like AIRS uses to do their term assignment.
Kate, this is the first time we've heard this, and I've asked about half a dozen people in the AIRS community whether this array makes sense.
Well,
So
I mean, you can fake it.
You might be right, but nobody else has.
Yeah. So you could fake it, like he's saying, but that's faking it, and it's structurally kind of a shim job in order to do it that way, because it doesn't represent the relationship in the way that the taxonomy model intends you to do so. And again, you can shim it. I just don't feel like it structurally manages that complication well. It is a shim, like it's not like you couldn't find a way to do it, and on either end somebody can shim it in to force it in, but it certainly is not it's not a good model to express the situation well, and it forces people to create kind of shadow entries for these compound terms, which can change and evolve. Like they're not permanent structures in the way that the main terms will be, and they shift and change according to the needs of the services. So often it's combining a target population with a service to create a service directed at a specific population. So you might have counseling services, and you apply that to a target population of Native women, and then you have counseling services for Native women as a concept, when they're never going to want to make counseling services for Native women as its own concept, because they already have 10,000 terms and they're not crazy. So they have to keep the taxonomy under control by controlling the concepts to a smaller set, and allow the people who are tagging the services to fully describe the service by combining two aspects to create a new meaning without changing the list of concepts.
Hey, doesn't this standard it's Andrew allow for, though, I think what I'm hearing from Rob, and unless I'm mistaken, my understanding is that the service taxonomy table, this bridge table, is essentially the application of any combination of term with one or more, or sorry, a service with one or more terms, which would accommodate these compound terms that we're describing. So wouldn't it just be the implementation of, or the interpretation of the standard, and just using the service taxonomy table to allow for, you know, this uniqueness that we see with how AIRS apply?
There's a difference. There's a difference between applying two terms to a service and linking two terms together and then applying that to a service conceptually in the way the taxonomy is designed. So I could apply Native women, for example, although, I mean, AIRS doesn't even want you directly applying the term Native women. They don't want you to use target populations directly in a record. But if you did, and I certainly have seen it happen, that's implying that the entirety of that function is for Native women. Whereas I've certainly seen cases where that particular service listing did counseling for Native women and housing for Native men, but the women weren't allowed to do the housing. Like they're being very specific in cases where some portion of the service is only allowed to be delivered to particular populations or targeted at particular populations. And so tying those two terms together as part of the attachment is part of how you're explaining the limits and the intentions of that service.
So and this is the last thing I'll say on this, because I'm sure I don't want to monopolize the time here, but I guess my test on all of this, when I look at the classification changes, is that we can accommodate this scenario with and that was why I asked a question around the kind of the bridging table. So is there anything that's missing from the standard that would prevent you from actually implementing the standard and meeting that particular requirement for data management?
it comes down to doing that shim that we were just talking about. So you can force the concept in, but it will not, it will mean that the table of terms is not going to be strictly the official list of terms, say the heirs terms, because in order to do the transportation, you're going to have to shim it in by creating temporarily these compound terms as if they were real terms. And then on the other end, you're going to have to identify those, break them into pieces, and then figure out how to translate that back. Because on the, so if I'm sending this out to someone, for example, I would have to identify what all the compound terms are in the records that I'm sending out. I'd have to create new entries in the taxonomy thing that represent this, and I guess combine the codes in some way in order to have something as the unique identifier that represented the fact that these are two. So I can't use the taxonomy codes as are because I'm trying to put two terms in there. And then on the other end, I'm going to have to look for cases where the IDs are not actually taxonomy codes, but are a listing of codes, break those apart. And so it's just more work on either end. You can do it, like this is transportable data. You could find a way to fit it in and get it out, but it introduces complications. If heirs is the system that's being used and the person who is using it uses heirs the way that heirs own document, like the taxonomy's documentation says to use it, this is a bit inelegant. Like it will be a little messy. It's doable. So I don't mean to say that. I just want to point out that there is a layer missing in this structure if you are trying to support heirs in the most effective way.
If I understand you correctly, Kate, I think we have a similar scenario and by no means have all the changes that have gone in HSDS2 covered all the extensions that we look for in the UK. And we have a concept of service eligibility. And you might, the example we work on is you're male and over 60, or you're on universal credits. So, and we've introduced a separate table to deal with that. So there are two separate entries. There's one for male and over 60, which would link to those two taxonomy terms. And there's another one for universal credits. So what I think, if I understand you correctly, I think this extension that is in HSDS2 helps support that, but isn't sufficient for our local interpretation. So we've done a further extension. And I think your scenario is the same, whereby you would have to introduce that extra table for those combinations. But I guess I considered that was one step too far for the international standards. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as I say, it's not like someone couldn't make this work, but because it seems like part of the driver for the change was to support heirs taxonomy explicitly, I felt it was necessary to point out that it is missing something in order to do that optimally.
What I'm hearing though, from if Mike's making a point, is that we already have a working method that could be extended onto this current spec to potentially provide a more elegant, although more complex way to handle these compound terms. Is that right?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying we can extend what we've got without breaking it, but it wouldn't need an extension to achieve what Kate's looking for. And I guess Kate's point is, well, if heirs is a main driver, it ought to accommodate it. But we're reaching a level of complexity which might go beyond what the other users can easily stomach.
So for the purpose of, go ahead, Rod, go ahead, sorry.
So this is where the final point of these changes comes in. That's a bit of tweaking to the governance and collaboration approach. So I'm confident that with a little bit of schema writing and a good conversation, myself, Kate and Mike and whoever else is interested could write an appropriate extension to the schema that would support this in a more elegant way. I should say it adds complexity if you're if you don't have that problem, it adds extra complexity and you might wonder why it's there. Whether or not those changes should or shouldn't be in the main standard, it sounds like we're not going to get immediate agreement on here, but I think we'd be able to get to a point of having something that was the agreed way of supporting, or a common way of supporting, this kind of complexity. And I think that would be a win for the open referral community, is that if in the UK context and in the AIRS context, we can say for both cases, this is the way that we'll do this in schema, that would be a win, because then the next time we have that situation to deal with, it's there, it's out there, it's available for people to use and go, oh yeah, I'm in this context, here's how I'll do this. And it's, if having the UK context and the AIRS context, if that's the vast majority of use, and then that sounds like an excellent inclusion, excellent candidate for inclusion into the standard. But also, if there are people for whom that additional complexity is off-putting, if they just think they'd never need that, making the standard too big and too complex in an already very difficult to describe. I mean, I spent a page of this 4-page document just describing terminology. It's already a very gnarly area to get your head into. So I think that's the trade-off. I actually have no strong opinions on which way the trade-off should go. I'm very willing to be heard by the community on that. And it sounds like it's not that difficult a modelling job. So maybe the next step is to make HSDS 2.0 what we have, and to convene that conversation to support that case, whatever we name it, more elegantly.
Could the standard comment on or advise on how a compound term could be created within the service taxonomy table to recognize these combinations, if there was some kind of suggested standard as to how to combine them, whether it be separated by some specific delimiter or whatever it be?
Yeah, excellent idea, Andrew. Yeah, excellent idea.
That may bring us to our next final issue.
Well, let me just say, I mean, as a software vendor, I guess, in the space, like a no-brainer compatibility with AIRS is like super valuable. And so even if that means adding a table that if you're not using AIRS just disappears or you just don't use, I mean, I'm all for it. I think being able to support AIRS without having to think how it's supported is, I mean, for the US is I'd imagine essential.
Okay, so let me see if I can wrap this all up. I appreciate this. So this is a productive discussion. I am sorry that I had not surfaced this issue through months of diligent engagement with the AIRS community in advance of this. Kate, this is why I'm so glad you joined us. So it sounds like there is in the current spec some extra complexity that would occur if you were trying to use the current proposed schema to handle compound terms. Yet the UK has already been demonstrating that they can add an additional extended table specifically to handle these compound terms. Andrew seems to think that that kind of extension specifically for working with the AIRS taxonomy could work. I think Kate also said a formal proposed extension or semi-formal proposed extension specifically for this could accommodate your concerns. And then I heard from Devin agreement from the sort of grassroots software development end of the spectrum that this would be an important thing. Did I just sum up that exchange fairly? Everybody feel heard?
Yeah, for me, it's really, it comes down to if we're going to have to shim it in, which is doable, there should be formal rules on how that's done, because otherwise the vendors are not going to have consistent data to work with so that they know what to expect from another vendor doing linked terms and what to send out. So if you're going to keep the simplified model, there should be strictly defined guidelines for how to manage this scenario so that everyone knows what to expect going out and in.
Yeah, I agree with Kate on that. And Greg, you summed it up nicely.
Okay.
So it's worth mentioning that.
Go ahead.
It's worth mentioning there is, and I wasn't planning on taking it out. I just hadn't talked about changing it. In the existing spec, there is guidance. I think it's a star character, or asterisk character that you use to combine terms. So I was really surprised to hear Kate go, Andrew, that's a brilliant idea, because what Andrew suggested sounds an awful lot like the hacking 1.1. But yeah, if that's, I'm happy to leave that in. Like, I wasn't planning to take that out. So that could be good enough for now. And I think there's definitely conversations to be had around how we support that in a structurally better way.
Okay.
And my apologies, I've been out of the loop for a few months here, so I have probably missed lots of good explanations.
Kate, no apologies. You're perfect. So it sounds like we have general rough consensus that the current proposal on the table is sufficient. Like you could actually handle the shim job of handling compound terms with some guidance that's already in the documentation that Rob will not only not take out, but maybe even make a little more prominent. And also we're going to explore in the near term the potential for an extension that will specifically handle these kinds of things that would be optional for dealing specifically with AIR's taxonomy and data sets. Does that sound about right? And are we good? Great. Sounds like we are provisionally approved. Thank you, everybody. That was the tough one. And it would not have been, I don't think, it would not be the taxonomy issue if we were not spending most of our time talking about it. It's definitely the biggest troll in this briar patch or what have you. Okay, let's see. All right. Anything, oh yeah, so we have custom fields. I don't expect this to be a tricky one. Rob, you want to give us a quick walkthrough and maybe we can put it in the context of what we just discussed?
Yeah, so I've hinted at this a lot already because it is really tied up with the taxonomy solution. So if you want to do extra stuff with HSDS, either for a particular use case or to support, particularly in a particular context, like in the UK, it's been great the way that the UK team have shared loads of information about what they've been doing, what their thought process was, what they got to. And while I don't think it's reasonable to expect everyone to do as much work as the Poison team have, I think we can set some expectations around if you're taking HSDS and doing something with it in a particular place, both how you will go about communicating with other people in that place, like what useful assets are to share. Technically, we're talking things like JSON merge patch and perhaps some guidance on how to use JSON merge patch to create a JSON-friendly diff and say, this is what we're changing, this is what we've added, this is what we've taken away. An overview of what kind of guidance is useful. And then introduce the expectation that that is something that's shared with the wider open referral community, because we've just found through talking that there are two cases opposite sides of the Atlantic that are using very different taxonomies and very different approaches, but still have this same problem of like, how do you resolve the anding of taxonomy terms? And I think there'll probably be others as more people adopt HSDS. So just starting to set some expectations around how you share that with the community and provide some guidance on how you can do that usefully, just to hopefully ease over that process of how you collaborate on things. I suppose the other part of that I also talked about is the
questions or comments? Oh, go ahead.
The many tables to many columns approach I talked about earlier. So formalizing this, if you can take two tables and they're linked by just an ID field and there's a one-to-one relationship at most between the entries in them, you can just left join them together at a schema level rather than at a needing to fill them up with data. So if you are producing an Airtable type thing, or you're doing it in a spreadsheet, where it makes sense to have a wider table than to have lots of tables, lots of tabs, like just affirming that that's fine, and that while you accept you're adding a little bit of extra work onto someone who wants to interoperate between that and mainline HSDS. If anyone has a good term to describe the schema of HSDS without being judgmental, main doesn't work, pure doesn't work, mainline might be okay. Yeah, naming things okay. Hard problems in IT, right?
Right on. I'm fine with mainline, I guess. Or I've been referring to core. Maybe that's not quite appropriate. Any questions about the formal guidance that we've got now for custom fields on the table?
And so with custom fields, like I can associate a custom a key value pair to services, locations, or what? Yeah, locations, organizations, contexts. Is that an accurate statement?
Could you give me an example? It might be an accurate statement.
Like if I wanted to say like this contact is deaf, I could assign a, could I with custom fields apply a key value pair to that contact and say like, whatever, disability key style.
So,
deaf.
so I'd expect you to use a new taxonomy system for that, because it's not actually a taxonomy system, it's an attribute system.
Okay. And then oh, you're saying the custom fields is just a method for applying additional fields that we didn't care about, that aren't in the standard.
Yeah, so in the UK, we might say that we want to add, I know, some location-based information, and we're saying that you're in a certain upper super output area, which is something that only me and Mike in this room know what it is, and no one else in the world cares about it. But we could say that we're going to add that as a higher level administrative geography. For some reason, we've promoted that to a top level in the standard. Don't know why. And we add that. That's a new field. It's a new table. We're going to link it in using all the existing mechanisms. There's an expectation that we share our work, that we say this is the problem that we had. Here's a JSON merge patch that describes the changes we've made. Here's the other stuff we've done to hook it into the standard. And we're still doing HSDS. But here's the thing that someone else in the world might find useful, if there's some equivalent administrative geography somewhere else in the world that someone cares about as much as we do.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so are we good on here? This all feels good to everybody? All right, I'm clapping. With that, I believe, given some nuance on the issues that Kate arose with compound terms, we'll be looking into like specific guidance we can provide in the documentation, as well as an extension that we might be able to work out in the near term. With that, I think we have an approval to move to 2.0. Thank you all for your time and your input and participation. I appreciate it. A couple of things. First, quickly, in addition to this taxonomy, this compound taxonomy table issue, one issue that I brought up that I'm finding is increasingly, I'm hearing a lot about it from the field, but we still only have a couple of examples, is this issue of announcements. We're not going to get into it now. I want to bring it up because like I think this is a top contender for a 2.1, and we have no idea when that kind of thing is going to come about. But I'm eager to hear feedback from you all. If you're seeing, people, other organizations, or if you all are working with like publishing announcements in association with a service or an organization, anything that's like, maybe a time-sensitive issue or an update. This is something that schema.org is now doing, that the federal government in the US is handling for coronavirus-related service announcements. And we're getting a lot of requests or I'm hearing some interest in seeing something like this in our schema. We just don't have many examples of it in the wild. If you have any examples, we'd like to hear from you in that thread that I just posted into the chat. Really quick, we don't have all that much time. I can go a few minutes over the hour, but only a few minutes over the hour. So we're going to start wrapping this up. But let me walk quickly through what comes next. We have an entity relationship diagram. Thank you, Rob. I'm going to try to work with Rob and also Porism to see if we can upgrade that entity and relationship diagram, first of all, to make it more attractive, potentially to be able to show some of the differences. If that sounds like something anybody here would want to help with, try to design this so that it looks really like grokkable by someone who's maybe only semi-technical, it would be great to have another hand in that work. We'll also be putting out an updated JSON data package. And we have a little bit of funding, about 1,100 Great British pounds set aside, so it's about 1,400 US dollars, specifically to upgrade our validator and to potentially make some progress on upgrading the sample data and also a transformer tool. That's funding that Open Data Services Co-op is sitting on. That's something that they could do, although they have a very busy schedule. And so that's funding that we want to make available for folks in the community who might want to take on that project of upgrading our validator. If that's something you're interested in, let's talk afterwards. I think a big question for me and for the initiative right now is how we handle HSDA, the API protocols. I still have a line of dialogue with Ken Lane, the API evangelist who developed HSDA 1.2. And he has a full-time job, so he's a lot less time than he did when we developed those in 2016. But I'd like to see some upgrade to the API protocol soon. And what Ken wanted to see was a live reference implementation before, he said that would help him make this a quick project for him. So as soon as we have an example of an API that's actually publishing data in this format, that might help Ken make upgrades to the API specifications as well. If you have any questions or suggestions on that front, let me know. I don't have a timeline on this, unfortunately. Any questions or suggestions about anything that I just talked through? Okay. I think one of the challenges, I think, in the next phase is figuring out how to document changes, like how to document when existing implementations are now 1.1 versus 2.0. Rob, you mentioned that and added it to the agenda. Do you have any comments on that specifically? Do we want to provide formal guidance, to the whole community, sort of asking people? Obviously we're not trying to control anybody and tell everybody that they have to upgrade from 1.1 to 2.0, but I think we are trying to make sure that we're clearly signposting when something is one version or another. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think now there are two versions out there, and because 2.0 is a fairly big jump and there's some stuff unresolved and people have spent a lot of time building their own systems and stuff, I think we want to make it clear that we're providing this to give people options. Like 1.1 is still a perfectly legit way of doing things, and you don't have to rush and upgrade if you've got better things to do. But also, if someone's coming into it, it's really helpful. It could be really confusing for someone to now make some data that uses the latest version of the spec, but doesn't work with some tools that we use. So I think it's just a bit of a plea to say, if your stuff supports only 1.1, that's absolutely fine, but please make that clear. And likewise, if your stuff only supports 2.0, it's a break and change. So if you're supporting both, awesome. If you're changing to 2.0, being clear about that. For a little while, we're going to have to be saying, when I say HSDS, I mean 1.1 or 2.0 or both or whatever.
All right. Questions or comments on that?
It would be nice if there were a machine-readable way of saying which, and ideally, if the validator's developed, the validator can just pick up which and validate accordingly.
So there is a version property in the standard, so you can hopefully do that. Although I can't remember if that's actually in the data, because you're not going to ship schema. Might slip that in.
If it's surfaced by any of the web methods, it'd be nice to know. Thanks.
All right. So Rob will follow up on that. And I'm also making a note that the validator should be able to accommodate both and indicate accordingly. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts about next steps from here? Right on. Okay. The last thing I'll say is the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States, I just made this announcement yesterday. They have, the Administration on Community Living has a challenge, a technology challenge for social care referral interoperability. And this past week, they specified in that challenge that they are especially looking for projects that use HSDS. They haven't gotten into the weeds on any versioning, but they are prioritizing projects that propose the exchange of resource directory data using these protocols. It's going to be pretty easy to put together a proposal, especially if you have an existing project that will be a strong contender. The deadline's December 14th. It's a small amount of money for the first set of winners, but then the amount of money that you can bring to the table will get higher in future rounds as it goes from proposal to demo to implementation. So I would be glad to work with anybody who's on this call or otherwise who wants to think about how to craft a proposal that's going to have a high likelihood of being blessed by the US government with a little bit of resources. All right. We did it. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Great discussion. This is collaboration in action. I think we made some solid progress on a couple of fronts. I really appreciate your time. We'll be sending up a roundup. This video will be posted to our YouTube channel. And please follow up with me if you have any questions or suggestions for next steps offline. All right.
Thank you, and nice to meet you all.
We're clapping.
Thank
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Andrew.
As well, everyone.
All right, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.